For a long time, the Federal Reserve has had the back of these markets, ever since just before I got into the market in '88, in the wake of that as well. Tim, we talked earlier, Martin and I and Sri, about the Federal Reserve's role in all this as well. And how does the Fed act now? We know that Jay Powell and Donald Trump don't necessarily see eye to eye, even though Powell was a Trump appointee, which people seem to forget as well. Right. What does the Fed do in response? Because that could be the confidence booster for the U.S. economy and U.S. stocks.
And we're going to have this debate, right? Does it really matter what the Fed does in response?
Okay, so all this is great. I love this conversation. So, by the way, you forgot the Beijing put, which everyone's talking about as well. We can talk about that later, which as well. But and obviously, the Trump put and where that struck is very much top of mind. I was just in Hong Kong the last three or 4 days seeing investors, and that's one of the key discussions. We can maybe get onto that later. But to your question about the Fed, so the market's gone from pricing basically 0 or maybe 1 cut at the beginning of this year to now 3. We've been at 2, so we were viewed as being more hawkish, more dovish, and now we're viewed as being slightly more hawkish. The ultimate path, we think, is 3 cuts to a neutral rate of about 3.5, 3.75. So that's just the cards face up baseline on the table.
Okay.
In terms of what the Fed does and how the market responds to it, I think a lot of that will depend on I guess, what is the narrative behind why the Fed is cutting? So there's sort of good cuts and bad cuts, right?
Yes.
So I'd say a good cut would be if growth, maintains reasonably stable and inflation comes in, so it just looks like, the Fed has room from an overly restrictive stance to ease somewhat. Market's going to like that, right? But if the reason they're cutting is, oh no, growth is falling, out of bed, and it's sort of a, I'm sort of exaggerating to make the point. It's kind of a panic cut, to try to support growth. The markets may say, well, the Fed's behind the curve, growth is coming down, 25, 50 basis point easing in rates may not be enough to assuage market concerns. So I think a lot of it depends upon the shift in the market's narrative from the beginning of this year, U.S. exceptionalism, which is basically stronger U.S. growth, higher dollar, a positive impact on U.S. growth from tariffs, or at least relative growth, and that was the outperformance story, plus deregulation and so forth. And now it's shifted to, well, tariffs may impact growth negatively. We're not going to get, maybe inflation goes up, but it's really shifted from an inflation strong growth story to all eyes on a growth downside.
And it's also shifted to